Welcome, everyone. The Center for the Women of New York's mission is to help women overcome financial, violence, social, wellness, and legal issues by raising awareness and advocating for full gender equality for women, understanding their needs, and connecting them with CWNY services, nonprofit partner organizations, and public resources to aid, uplift, and address their challenges. We have two locations, one in Bayside, Fort Taunton Park, and the other in Kew Gardens at Queensboro Hall. These are our current services and programs. We have an advocate and referrals program. If we don't have the services that women need, then we refer them to our partner organizations and government agencies. We offer a financial literacy workshop series, career workshop series, a women in crisis support group, a caregivers support group once a week, one-on-one tax prep in the months of March and April at both of our locations. And that notice will be coming soon, probably in January or February. We offer weekly gardening workshops and weekly conversational ESL classes. We have a legal support team where your questions are answered via email. And we offer weekly yoga classes, self-esteem workshops, and this women's think tank on various women's issues once a month. Please go to cwny.org/past-events for recordings of all of the events that you saw in the previous slide. Your questions are important. They will be addressed after each of the presenters has presented. Please use the chat box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you dialed in, you can email your questions to events, that's with an S, at cwny.org, and we will answer them as well. Our panelists today are from Queensboro Council for Social Welfare, and that would be Joan Serrano-Laufer, Executive Director, Queensboro Council for Social Welfare. Our next panelist is Katie Hine, Director, Caregiver Support Western Queens, Sunnyside Community Services. And Michelle S. Carino, Founder and Managing Director of Carino Law. We will begin with Joan Serrano-Laufer from Queensboro Council for Social Welfare. Welcome, Joan, and thank you for giving us this time and your expertise.
Thank you very much, and thank you for co-sharing this caregivers group with me. And again, my apologies for everyone. I had some trouble getting on, although I've been on many Zooms, even two today. Let me just open my little notes. So one of the things that I always say to folks when I start with caregivers is my airplane oxygen situation. I was on an airplane to go visit my parents in Florida with my first child, and we were on the plane, and he was maybe 6 months old, and the person working the plane said, I don't know that stewardess is still the name of it, but let's use it. She said, when you get if you're holding a child or if you're here with somebody and the oxygen comes down, give it to yourself, and then you can give it to that person. And I thought, how could I be a good mother and give my baby oxygen when he's so little and he needs it? And she said, if you gave it to him and you needed it, what would happen? He would fall on the floor. So please give it to yourself first, and then when you're able to, you can share it. That stayed with me. Now he's 40 years old, stayed with me that long. And I try really to remember to do things myself that are important and natural. And I urge all of you to do that. It's too easy to fall into caregiver services and self-care for caregivers not going together, but we really have to. If we don't have ourselves in good shape, we can't take care of them. Common problems are that the caregiver may not be sleeping adequately, may not be eating adequately, may not have time to exercise, doesn't go to bed when they're sick, postpones their own doctor visits. And we all have to remember that these things, we have a responsibility to ourselves and to our family for our own care. If we're not in good shape, we can't do good work. And it really is something that many caregivers find they can't keep their own appointments because they're busy taking the person they're caregiving for. There are several different kinds of caregivers. Some caregivers have signed up as their job, and that makes certain things a little bit different. Some caregivers are being paid to be caregivers, but it's not a relative. In both cases, the responsibility of the family member is much different than the person who's being paid. And when the family member is paid, they have to also remember that this is their job, but it's not what they have to do 24/7. So take responsibility for your own care. The only other thing I want to mention, and again, I'm keeping this pretty brief because we do want to take your questions, is elder abuse. Sometimes the the person you're caring for says they're losing things when they're really being stolen, or they say they're being stolen when they really forgot where they put it. So keep an eye on what's going on when you're not there by just checking what's around, what's needed, who's taking care of what, so that you can know when it's time to stop with somebody and um, when it's time to take care of what you're doing. So with that, I move on to the next person.
Thank you so much, Joan. So, our next panelist is Katie Hine from Sunnyside Community Services. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you so much for inviting me to participate today, Victoria. So I'm going to share my PowerPoint with you now. Give me 1 second, please. Okay, so I'd like to start with talking about Sunnyside Community Services. Our organization is a settlement house that serves the community, all ages from pre-K up through older adults, with our Center for Older Active Adults and our case management services for homebound older adults, and also, everything in between, including our immigration services program. And what I'm here today representing is our caregiver program. I'm the director of Caregiver Support Western Queens. But I want to step back and talk about who is a caregiver. Joan spoke a little bit about that, but I want to kind of, identify that a little bit more even. And by that term, I'm really talking about people who are not professionals, who are not home health aides, but really the family member, friend, neighbor who gets involved in taking care of someone else. They might be doing real hands-on care with personal tasks around the house, or even assistance with meals or bathing, but it could be helping them manage their medical appointments, trying to help them sort out their finances, just making sure that they get groceries delivered. And so sometimes those caregivers could be even long distance. They might not be even in the same state. Our programs provide people support who are caring for someone who has a chronic illness or disability. It could be Alzheimer's disease or another kind of dementia. We also provide supports to people who are grandparent or kinship caregivers. And I'll talk more about that as well. We have funding from the New York City Department for the Aging and the New York State Department of Health. And I want to emphasize all our services and supports to caregivers are free, regardless of the documentation or legal status of the caregiver or the person they take care of. So we provide a lot of different services. This slide lists them all, but I'm going to jump on next to the, go into each of them a little bit more in detail, starting with our counseling support. So we provide support to people one-on-one or through support groups. There are a lot of stresses that could be involved with taking care of someone else. It could be that it's a real adjustment for them in their role and how they are relating to that person if they have to suddenly take care of a parent in a way that they start to feel like they're almost the parent taking care of them. That can cause a lot of strain. Maybe the person they're trying to help doesn't want their help. So there's could be some tension because of that, or just them trying to adjust and learn skills and try and find resources for themselves in managing things. So that emotional support is really needed for a lot of our caregivers. So we provide that either one-on-one, or as I mentioned, we have support groups. Often, right now they're meeting virtually. We do have a group that meets in person for Russian speaking caregivers, but we have a group in Spanish as well, and English, and different categories of caregiving. So I think it's a real good opportunity in a support group for people to connect with someone who's in a similar situation. Caregiving can be very isolating. So I think that connection is important, either through a support group or by attending our workshops and trainings where they can, come together and learn from professionals on different topics, whether it's how to get a power of attorney or other legal documents in place, healthcare proxies, or getting education about specific health conditions or nutritional things related to caregiving. Also self-care, where people can focus on, maybe meditation or, learning to really take care of themselves in a different way as a caregiver, because I think the focus is often on the person they have care of instead of themselves. We provide information and assistance in a lot of different ways, whether that's just, giving support and helping people learn about what nursing homes and rehab centers, services, transitioning from the hospital to those, or, making decisions about care in the long term, but also connecting people to benefits, and whether that's the caregiver themselves or the person they care for. We can help with both sides of the situation. So in addition to that, we can provide some direct financial support for something. So depending on the situation and need, we can potentially help with reimbursements for doctor copays, purchases for some house safety items for the person. Maybe they need, help purchasing nutritional supplements, or, we've even helped people with their utility bills and things like that. We also do respite services, and, as it says here on the slide, respite means a break for the caregiver. So it's a temporary home care that we can provide, or for the person to come to our adult day program. Sunnyside has an adult day program for people who have dementia to come and connect and get social support and service, and a break for the caregiver during the day. And so one of our respite services can be connecting them to that program and providing some of that. And as I mentioned earlier, we do grandparent and kinship support as well. So that's people who are taking care of a child relative, but they are not the parent. There's a lot of people who have really taken on the role for a child in their family and they need support as well. And so we can connect them with all of the other things that we just mentioned: financial support, emotional, one-on-one individual counseling, guidance on benefits. And just briefly, our eligibility. So our program is for people who are in New York City, specifically either in Queens or one of the boroughs. If it's outside of our area, we will connect you to a program that is like ours, that serves that area. So there's no if you come to us, we'll provide support or connect you to another program that does. And the ways you can contact us are through our Care Connections line. I have the number on the screen here. I'll put it in the chat as well. Visiting the Sunnyside Community Services website, or if you call the city's 311 number, they will refer you to us if you're in our catchment area. So I will leave it there. So happy to take questions at the end. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Katie. And now we welcome Michelle Carino from Carino Law. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you very much for allowing me to participate today. Let me share my screen. Okay, there it is. Okay, we're going to discuss today some of the legal issues that affect caregivers. Many people come into the caregiving role over time. Very often it's a family member, or maybe you're a friend or a neighbor who offers some assistance, and then things evolve over time into you're expanding your role. It can be a very physical and emotionally demanding role. As you grow into the role and it expands, very often we come up against some legal obstacles that are intended many times to protect the care recipient, but can be very frustrating for the caregiver who's trying to do their best to help. One of the most basic principles that I encounter all the time is people trying to determine if they actually have legal authority to act. You may be carrying out many functions for someone that you're caring for, but there may be limits to that authority, and you may not even recognize what those limits are or what the legal requirements are until you're faced with some of those circumstances. So, for example, here's some of the, on this slide are some of the ways that a person can determine if they have authority to act. If there is a spouse that's still living, by law, a lot of times spouses will have certain rights in terms of being able to share information, but there may be limits there as well. A power of attorney is a legal document that will lay out what authority you have, especially to conduct financial affairs. A healthcare proxy or a HIPAA authorization relates to your authority to act related to the person's health and well-being, both when they are receiving care and later on if they become incapacitated and can't communicate their needs. A guardian is someone who is legally appointed by the court to provide care. A court defines what the scope of authority is for a guardian. There may also be a trust that's been created. A trust can be a living document that gives an agent or a trustee certain powers to act for someone who's become incapacitated. And a will is the most common thing people are familiar with. However, the will really only comes into play when the care recipient has passed. So people are always saying to me, oh, well, I'm the executor. Well, if the person you're caring for is still with us, your authority doesn't exist. So it's important to understand what each of these documents allow you to do and whether they're in place. Again, just building on what we discussed, every document, every legal document may give you certain rights that are defined in that document. So you may be able to have financial power, health or medical related powers. You may have powers with certain documents to interact with Medicaid and other health plans. For special needs planning, it may be a person has certain disabilities that we need to account for. And again, the estate planning and administration aspect really only arises at the end of life. And this may be some examples. These are things that I hear about all the time when people come in. People always come in and they'll say, well, I added my name to the bank account, so now I have authority. And in actuality, that may only give you authority to write checks or pay bills. You may not be allowed to do certain other things like move money around or open and close accounts or change the names of the people who are on it. And the same thing, each of the examples here show that sometimes you think you have authority, but it may actually be more limited than you realize. And that's why it's very important to check to see what authority you've been granted and what it allows you to do. So if you don't have the authority, how do you go about obtaining it? Well, if the person that you're caring for is still well enough to communicate their wants and needs, that actually is the preferable situation. We try, when someone comes into my office, it's very important if they come in and they're the caregiver, I will immediately ask about the status of the care recipient. How old are they? What conditions they may have? Are they able to participate in our meetings? As a caregiver, you may be extremely well-intentioned and you have a full plate and you're juggling so many things, but it's very important for us to involve the care recipient and to speak to them directly, because the situation where they need care may be equally upsetting and emotionally taxing for them. So we try very hard to start a dialogue and have them participate to the extent that they can, to tell us what it is they need help with and how they would like that to be achieved. In cases where the person has reached a stage where they're unable to participate and maybe you need that authority, in those circumstances, power can be granted by a court. It's a more cumbersome process. We have to file a petition and define, there has to be an examination, but it is possible where needed to obtain those powers legally if needed. So the key takeaways that I wanted to leave you with today, and this was all, very introductory, but for the most part, the primary rule of thumb here is to try to include the care recipient to the extent that you're able to the extent that they're able to participate. It makes the relationship stronger. It defines your powers in a much better way. And it's usually easier going forward if you lay a strong foundation that way. I would encourage everyone to be proactive. At the beginning of time, you may not see what the road ahead looks like in terms of how this person's care needs are going to evolve, but it's important to start initiating those dialogues early on so that at least you can start vetting what this person's wishes are, and then if to the extent possible to put those documents in place. You also, if you're being proactive, you can have those documents established and then leave them in the custody of an attorney, leave them in the custody of another family member or in a safe deposit box, so that this way the person that is receiving the care still feels that they can control how things unfold. That allows you to be proactive and still has things in place for when the need arises in the future. I encourage everyone also to consult with others. Katie and Joan spoke to you about services that are available. Certainly here, Victoria offers a lot of support groups through her organization. Those consultations can be with these types of organizations, with an attorney, and also with other family members who may not be on the front line, but may be part of your support network. Also, to recognize at all times that you legally, physically, mentally, you are in the ultimate position of trust. It's a very significant role that you've taken on. And that's why it becomes important for you to open lines of communication and to make sure that you're taking care of yourself as well. People are, asking a lot of you, and you're giving a lot of yourself. But there are people out here who want to support you in accomplishing that to the best of your ability. So I thank you for your time, and I welcome any questions you may have. And this is my information. If you need to email me directly, I will do my best to respond to you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. So please do write your questions in the chat, and if you'd like to ask them, we can also unmute you and you could ask the panelists directly. So please do add your questions, and thank you to Joan Serrano Lawfer, to Katie Hine and Michelle Carino for giving us your time, your expertise, and your informative information. So as you're thinking of questions, we'd like to review a little bit more about the Center for the Women of New York. We do on our website have caregiver resources, so do visit our website, cwny.org. If this link is too lengthy, just type in the search caregivers with an S, and it will bring you to the resources we have curated for you. And we repeat our esteemed panelists' information. You can reach Sunnyside Community Services here, and this is their telephone number, their website, and you can write to info@scsny.org. You can reach Michelle Carino's law firm at mcarino@carinolaw.com and at this number. And you can reach Queensboro Council for Social Welfare at qcswnyc@gmail.com. And if you recall from Joan's bio slide, Queensboro Council for Social Welfare has been around for over 100 years, and they are in the business of referring Queens residents to the agencies and support they need, not only on caregiving, but on varied social issues and needs. So once again, those are our services that we offer and our upcoming events. Please do join us if you'd like to become a member. You not only join a community of like-minded individuals, but your membership donation helps us provide the services for those in need of them, or donate directly at cwny.org/donations. And here is our contact information at both of our locations. And once again, our website is cwny.org. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We have a YouTube channel with the past recordings of these think tanks, panel discussions on women's issues, as well as financial literacy recordings, career workshop recordings, and we do have a podcast channel at Anchor, which is now Spotify for podcasters. So again, if you have a question, You can ask it in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we will answer it. And while you're thinking of your questions, I'd like to share that from the chat, some of you are caregivers, some of you are both. I know I am both, and that's what led us at the Center for the Women of New York to offer a caregiver support group. What Joan and I have been finding in this collaboration between our two nonprofit organizations, that caregivers, as each of the panelists has said, are isolated. They feel alone and they're overwhelmed, and their time is not their own. Their routine is out the window, so they never find time to even look for support. And sometimes they find support, but they don't have time to keep an appointment. Sometimes they don't make it to the support group because that person in need that they're caring for has an issue at that very time that the support group is offered. But what Joan and I have found, and Joan, you can corroborate this, that when a caregiver joins us just in the initial interview, before they join their peers in the support group, they immediately say, having spoken with us, that they feel a weight has been lifted, that they don't feel so alone, and they already feel supported just by speaking with us. So we do encourage you out there to speak with caregivers, and those of you who know of a caregiver, offer them an ear. Sometimes they just need someone to listen to them. They don't have time to meet in person, so that's why ours is by phone. Some of them don't prefer Zoom, find that cumbersome. So they join us by phone and are quite happy with the support given by their peers and by the facilitators. So there is one question that keeps coming up, and that, we will also end this session with a take action. How is it that we can help the issue of caregiving and caregivers? What is it that we as partner organizations can do to further the cause? I know there are legislative changes that have been made. Corporations give caregivers leave. There are some federal and state and city laws that are in favor of caregivers, and employers are mandated to give sick leave and caregiver leave. So there are actions that can be further taken to support caregivers, whether through nonprofits, through law firms, or through legislative change. So with that, we'll start the Q&A. I do have one question that keeps coming up from caregivers, and that is, my loved one needs more care than I can give. How do I get home health aides? If it's beyond that, how do we enroll the person in a facility? We really can't afford it. And they always ask about powers of attorney, always. So these three questions keep coming up. So let's start with the first question. The person I'm caring for needs more care than I can give. What's my next step?
Well, I could start with an answer for that, it's really first looking at what are your economic resources, what is your ability to pay for care. Most people really can't afford it in an extended way because nursing home costs are crazy. Home care costs, although aides, are barely making enough to survive on, paying for home care on the other side of it is too much of a challenge for most people. And so long term, most people at some point need to look at applying for Medicaid covered home care. And in New York State that, you know, there's a little bit more ability to do that than in some. And, you know, I know that's what Michelle helps a lot of her clients with. And that's a big part of, you know, when we have caregivers coming to us, it's to try and get home care in place. And we can give them a little bit as a temporary respite, but it's really looking at applying for Medicaid for most of them in that process and helping them. You know, we have Medicaid specialists at Sunnyside who can help with the applications. You know, if people have, you know, a home or resources that they need to worry about how that impacts their eligibility for Medicaid. You know, I think that's when they often need to look at working with an elder law attorney to try and figure that out. Michelle can talk more about that. But on the other side of it, like this is, I think if you're looking for a take action, you know, like bringing this issue to the forefront more and more is really important because, you know, our society is not set up to help people long term who are getting older and want to stay in the community and just need the home care support to be able to do that.
I could just add a little on what Katie said. I think I would echo the same sentiment that the system really is not designed for long-term support. It strains everyone to their final limits. I think sometimes what I encounter, the people that come to me they're in need of getting Medicaid, preferably to stay at home first. That's usually their first desire. And a lot of times it's a very complicated process. Even when you put the application in, since COVID, the offices are very understaffed. It's very hard to get assigned to a caseworker at Medicaid, and you're usually waiting at least 60 days for your initial response when you file your application. That's been my experience lately. And then it may be another 30 days after that until you complete the necessary evaluations for them to determine what level of care you're entitled to. So the applications involve both economic qualification, but then also medical qualification. And in total, it's not uncommon for that to take as much as 90 days before you can get a home care worker in place. Sometimes though, if you are providing care and you anticipate that Medicaid is eventually going to approve your application, one thing you want to do, I would encourage you to do, is to try to keep very good records of the costs that you've incurred out of pocket in trying to supplement. Maybe it's expenses related to getting equipment. Maybe this person needed a bed or a walker. Maybe there were other products that they needed now, hygiene products that you've paid for out of pocket. Maybe you've also gotten someone into the home for a couple of hours a week because that's what your economic resources afforded you. If you keep all of those receipts, Medicaid does do some reimbursement for the previous 90 days from the time that you've applied. So that can be at least some comfort to know that if you have all these expenditures accumulating, that there will be a way for you to recoup some of those costs in the future, so that this way you don't sacrifice getting care in place while you're waiting for this very tedious, cumbersome process to wrap up.
That was also so helpful. So thank you, Katie and Michelle, for those responses. They were so informative. I learned something myself, and I'm in the business of researching caregiver resources. So there's always more to be learned. Thank you both so much. So if we could also speak a little more about that power of attorney, it comes up all the time. And then if we could also speak to the trust question comes up a lot.
Okay, so let's start with a power of attorney. powers of attorney, sometimes when you go to like a bank, they'll have their own form and they'll ask you to complete it, and maybe somebody else will sign and you do that at the bank. Those are not considered durable powers of attorney. Those are specific to that institution. So your powers may be only limited to that bank or that, financial advisor or whatever. A durable power of attorney is a statutory form. It's the same form for the entire state of New York. The form itself, I think, is accessible online, but you need to be very careful in completing it. There are a lot of places that need to be properly initialed. And then there are also sections that allow both for appointment of an agent that will have certain financial or other powers. And then you can also appoint successors. So oftentimes when there are spouses, a lot of times, because it makes the spouses comfortable, they will each be each other's agents. However, we try to set up successors because realistically, it may come to pass that at some point in the future, both of the spouses may need assistance, or one may not be, because maybe that spouse is providing a lot of the day-to-day health issues, they may not be available to handle the financial issues. We like to think that we can do it all, but sometimes we can't. So it is very useful to use a backup when you have a power of attorney as well. Also, the power of attorney has a section now based on a change in the law that happened back in 2021 that allows this whole section of modifications. And the modifications are where that's really the meat of this document. And that's where I would encourage you to try to consult with some legal outreach or other support to figure out how to make that part of the document work for you, because it's in that space where you can be granted power to speak to Medicaid, to speak to the IRS, to speak to the Veterans Administration, where you can be given authority to get into bank accounts or change bank accounts if needed to pay for care, where you are able then to have more flexibility to arrange things financially for the person who may need services. So that's a little bit trickier in that space because the modifications are set forth in the statute itself. So sometimes it's hard to work your way back into those things. But once it's completed and you have that original, then any institution should accept that statutory form because it's standard throughout New York State. So unlike the ones that are given to you by a bank or, a particular institution, the statutory form is accepted by everyone by law. So that would be the one that you really want to have in place and to set up as early in your process as you can.
And Michelle, just to prove that I was listening when you joined our caregiver group to answer this very question, you said that to be very careful, I think you may have mentioned it already, but let's reiterate. You said to be very careful that they don't find an old New York form. It recently changed.
Yes, the change happened in 2021. If you have an older one, it still will be honored. It's grandfathered. However, the older ones don't have all of the modifications in it that are now permitted. So if you're able to, and you have a care recipient who still has capacity or whose needs now have shifted over time, you may want to look at the updated version because it allows you, like I said, to be more specific and to expand the scope of what you're permitted to do. And it spells that out with greater specificity. So if you're able to update your form, it may be in your best interest, in the care recipient's best interest for you to do so. And by the way, just as a general rule, it's useful for you to revisit your documents at least, I would say once a year, but certainly once every other year, just because as a caregiver, your role changes over time. The care recipient's needs change over time. So by revisiting those documents, it allows you to stay up to date so that you have the right thing in place based on your current circumstances.
Thank you so much. So if you could address the trust question.
The trust question also, this comes up a lot of times with people who are applying for Medicaid. Historically, we always associate trusts with people who have a lot of wealth. We always think, the trust fund baby is, a colloquial expression. But in reality, a trust is set up a lot of times for people that are applying for benefits, so that we attempt to maximize their economic means, rather than having to exhaust them before we become eligible for care. And I'm not even talking at like extended, millionaire kind of limits. Sometimes, a person may have a co-op or a home, and that's their most valuable asset, and they're trying to figure out how to preserve it. They may have, just one or two bank accounts. So it may not be, massive amounts, but the idea is, how do I try to set that aside so that, as I said, you're not required to exhaust it before we can start getting care. The goal is to try to use it to supplement the care that you might be able to obtain through other benefit programs, rather than, like I said, exhausting it and then, sort of always being on the edge. So we can set up what's called a Medicaid Asset Protection Trust. Those kinds of trusts are compliant with all of the Medicaid rules. And then we transfer ownership, legal ownership of the assets, bank accounts or whatever, into the name of that Medicaid trust. We then set it up so that the person may be the beneficiary of the trust. If you already are taking care of this person and handling their financial affairs, you may become the trustee of that trust. And really all it is, there's nothing, legally complicated about it. It's just kind of like, a box. It's kind of like a legal safe deposit box where you're able to place things that you're trying to preserve and just kind of put a cover on it, and you'll hold the key so that you're able to access those things going forward. It's better, again, with Medicaid, if you're receiving care in the community and you're at home, then you're able to preserve those and you can still maintain your eligibility. If you are needing to go into a permanent facility, that becomes a little bit more complicated in terms of using the trust, and that requires different levels of analysis. But I would say that if you're at the earlier stages and you foresee that, you are trying to protect certain things, again, so that you can preserve them to supplement the cost of care, a trust might be a very appropriate way to try to accomplish that.
Thank you, Michelle. So I'd like to add that the New York City Commission on Human Rights, that's one of the rights that is covered, that employers cannot discriminate against caregivers. And so there are some laws that are already in place, but as Katie said, we do want to take action and expand services for those who need caregiving, expand services for caregivers themselves. And also, we partner with many other organizations, and so many of them are fighting for the rights of home health aides, who, as you know, many of them are women, and that's why this Women's Issues think tank is so important, to bring light to the issues that women face as 50% of our population, but they are more than the majority of caregivers, whether they are paid or in the family. We did have a male caregiver join our support group in the past. He was a son. So we don't discount that there are males who do give care and have need of support as well. We don't discount that. But we do know that many home health aides are women, and they are terribly underpaid. And recently, our partner organizations have fought for equity for them and fairness. So many of them were working 24-hour shifts, which is impossible. How do you have a break? Oh, well, when you're the person you're caring for is sleeping. No, when the person is sleeping, you're also working and making sure they're safe. So there have been, we can only speak to the state of New York, but for those of you who are joining us from other states, please do take action that home health aides and caregivers are being respected and are being given rights under your state's law. But we do know New York State is on the cutting edge of caregiver rights and home health aid pay equity and fair job conditions. But so much more needs to be done. But do know that if you are taking action, there are agencies, government agencies, and nonprofits working toward fairness for caregivers, whether paid or unpaid. And I'd like to conclude with something for Joan to probably visit. Some of our caregivers that join our group are very angry. They are overwhelmed and they are angry at siblings who are not helping, or angry at the world because they're trapped in this caregiving situation. So Joan always has words of wisdom for them. Joan, could you share some of the ways you encourage and support our caregivers?
I always ask the caregivers to remember themselves. As I said at the beginning of this meeting, it's too many of us when we're caregivers spend so much time worrying about the person we're giving care to that we don't give ourselves any care. So I ask them, we meet on Thursday afternoon, and I usually ask at the end of it to look for something that you can do over the weekend. If you're not in good shape, and that includes don't have some time for yourself, you're not doing the job as well as you could, but you're also not leading any happiness. So whether it's someone who likes to go to the zoo and see the animals or the birds, or someone who likes to walk, or somebody who wants to get their hair done, each of us has to find time for ourselves, or we don't have the ability really to work on. Not to say if somebody is, you know, that applies to everybody, but it does. At some point, we have to take care of ourselves. We have to make sure we're eating properly. We have to make sure we're sleeping properly. And that gives us the strength to do what we need to do, but also to be ourselves. And sometimes it just means asking someone, you like to cook, would you cook a meal for so and for me today? Or look to a member who might be family member who might be willing to take on just a small part so that you don't have everything to do. I think that's what you were looking for, Victoria.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And there's not enough time to share all of the pearls of wisdom and encouragement that Joan gives our caregivers. I would like to add that we do remind them that by joining our support group, by carving out that hour for themselves or less, they are not required to stay the hour. If they want to join for 5 minutes, we make that very clear, that there is no guilt or no rudeness if they need to leave or if they need to join later. And so we remind them by just taking this time to join our group and to be with their peers, that they are doing something for themselves. And we always remind them, what is it that you enjoy in life? Can you think about doing that in the next couple of days for yourself? So we conclude with that. Do support your caregivers that cross your path. They don't always reach out, but do know that if you know they're already a caregiver, that they need your support in any which way you can give it, whether it's professionally or as a friend, a neighbor, a relative. So thank you for joining today, and do check out CWNY.org. Do check out our 3 panelists organizations, and we thank them so much for this time. And have a great day, everyone.